let's go into the campaign mapping. I've read on the internet about shortening the turn length from 6 months to 2 weeks. What difference do you think that's going to be making in terms of the gameplay on the campaign map?
Strategically, it makes quite a large difference in that the first major and obvious one is economics. You don't raise as much tax revenue in 2 weeks as you do in 6 months. So in that respect, you take less money into the treasury, which means straight away, things like purchasing buildings and armies becomes a lot more decisive. When you invest in something, you have to invest in something that's worth the money you've got coming in. Second to that, you've also got recruitment times and movement ranges. So recruiting an entire 20-stack army in 2 clicks now is impossible. That whole Total War tank rush of just going, all my towns need to build, end turn, oh look, there's my 220 stacks, it's gone. It's now a case of, okay, I'm going to invest in this, it's going to take a little while to build, and then when it comes to fruition, it's there. It makes you much more precious, much more strategic and indeed realistic about your armies. So squandering, just millions of units in kind of spam battles is no longer the way forward. So it has a number of impacts in terms of the actual game. Also, the other thing it lets us do is represent the full 4-season spread on the campaign map. So you get a spring, summer, autumn and a winter. And all of those things obviously affect the terrain which you fight on, the weather conditions you find in the battle maps, the weather that affects the men in terms of attrition and supply. So there's a lot to plan for there in terms of your campaigning and fighting. So yeah, it makes a big difference.
And obviously with the Russian campaign and the disastrous effects
that was Napoleon's utter demise eventually. It just as it was Nazi Germany's utter demise as well. It's a case of campaigning in the winter in Eastern Europe is bloody difficult. And we make sure that that's a fact.
There's also, I've read reports of your troops taking attrition as they're in movement phase in a campaign map. Could you unpack that a bit more and how that's going to be affected by the 2-week cycle? Yeah,
well, the way this works is certain areas on the map during certain seasons create a level of attrition for troops. So if you imagine the Egyptian deserts at the height of summer, perhaps Eastern Europe in the frozen wastes of winter, these things will have a heavily negative value on the troops themselves. So troops stationed in locations that are subject to those climates, that aren't barracked or aren't in friendly provinces, or are moving through them during that season, will find themselves suffering pretty hideous rates of attrition. So men will be dying as a result of disease and starvation and forced march, just in general the environment's toll on the army as it moves. So armies moving through locations which suffer particularly from attrition will suffer from it. Armies stationed within those locations will suffer from it. So it's a simple case of being aware of your geography and aware of your season, and planning campaigns based around those things. And if you have to do them, making sure there are kind of islands of supply pre and post those movement phases.
Will this attrition rate per se be variable in terms of difficulty?
At the moment we're still balancing it, so it's a question of we don't want it to be to the point where it's decimating whole armies for players, in maybe 2 or 3 turns. So it becomes incredibly difficult, and equally we don't want it to have no effect at all. So it's being balanced at the moment. So what I would say is, dependent on the army size, its distance from home, the severity of the weather in which it's placed, and the height of the season in which it's moving, you'll find all of these different things interacting with the army at sliding scales.
And are there different buffs that perhaps particular leaders or particular units might have that would stop?
That's correct. Certain technologies on the tech tree for certain nations unlock the ability to, forced marching and things like that might create a slightly larger movement rate. The ability to forage, which is another technology that can be upgraded, allows armies to be a bit more kind of self-sufficient on the move. The core system as well, which is another system of army movement which you can research, which again allows the armies to move a bit further and to make more of the environment that they've got. So there are a number of different things, plus a number of different personalities which can be used to counter this effect. So certain generals will have greater movement ranges, allowing you to move through dangerous areas quicker. Others will have kind of the ability to make sure that the troops are well supplied and well kept, even in certain areas where they necessarily wouldn't be. So there will be certain key generals and indeed technologies that can help you kind of get over some of the attrition effect.
So would it be fair to say that in Napoleon Total War, you're moving kind of towards more of a tech tree system like you might see in Civilization 4?
A little bit more, yes. I mean, you might remember we brought a tech tree in with Empire. So Napoleon is very much a continuation of that, although with slightly greater gameplay implications for all of the tech. So you'll find that the new political systems that you instigate, the new military technologies that you do, and indeed obviously all the new kind of stuff you bring in on the industrial and the economic side, they have a much greater impact on the gameplay in certain key locations. One of the great things about your earlier question about Napoleon the man is that as well as being a great military leader, he was also, of course, the Emperor of France. He introduced a new codex of laws, he reformed the education system, so he suddenly gives us the basis for all these fantastic kind of new European discoveries in terms of sociology and politics, as well as all the things that go with military advancement as well.
That segues in nicely into my next question, actually, and that's some of the new ways perhaps you might have incorporated this new period of social change, and particularly social and political upheaval, because we not only had the French Revolution, but we also had riots and mass movements going on in England around the time, and also new aristocratic leaders in Russia. How have they been expressed in terms of the campaign map and also the battle map of the game in general?
Yeah, all of the political situations of Europe, the way that, obviously, as with most Total War games, we model them so that they're realistic at the start. So the ruling class, the ruling system, all of that stuff is put in at the beginning, so it's ready to go. As the game evolves and is subject to your interactions and indeed the AI's decisions as well, it begins to change in terms of, right, you piss enough of the lower class off, you'll get a revolution against the aristocracy, you piss enough of the aristocracy off, you get a revolution against... Those kind of mechanics still exist. Importantly, with Napoleon kind of as a whole, one of the major changes we've made is that republicanism, this force of republicanism coming from France, is an extremely feared concept in all of the aristocratic families and royalty of Europe. So you'll find that, the great kind of Anglo-French divide really cemented and kind of canyonized with Napoleon and Britain, because Britain was ultimately very afraid that he was going to export this revolution to us, and that we were going to lose the monarchy and everything else as well. So they painted Napoleon as this upstart boogeyman and the child of the revolution, in which that no breeding nor kind of technique was required to be a general. You could just be this little man who had no worthiness to sit at a gentleman's table. So a lot of was done on the PR side against republicanism.
They compared him to Hannibal.
That's correct. But then in the real terms, like the way that Napoleon works, that for example the gentlemen in the game, as well as being researchers and duelists, as you'll be familiar from Empire, they are now what you'd call kind of like evangelists for the revolution. So they're leading intellectuals of France that if you send into foreign cities, basically act as Republican missionaries. So they turn the populace of that city into pro-Republicans, who will eventually revolt against their rulers if they don't have that kind of system already, and basically welcome you as a liberator. So there are a number of ways that